Hello, this is Mike Omeg again from Whiskey Gulch, New Hampshire, breeder of Large Fowl, New Hampshires, and also moderator of the New Hampshire's SOP group on Facebook. I posted a couple of videos earlier of how I hatch and brood my chicks, and I want to talk a little bit today in this video about probably one of the most important aspects of breeding birds, and that is growing out our chicks that we hatch. So I'm actually standing on the roof of my house because it gives us a good overview of my facilities that I use for growing out my birds. I just wanted to show you this overview because it covers a couple of different things. Over here we have my individual grow out pens. I also use those as breeder pens for my breeder birds. I have 20 of these units, and we'll go over them in some detail here after I climb down, hopefully without breaking my neck. Then I have 4 A-frame units that we're going to go over here shortly that are out on the pasture, where I grow out the birds until I cull them in the late summer, early fall. So let's head down and take a look at what I've got. Just take a couple of minutes and comment on what I think is the biggest oversight that people getting excited and starting to breed poultry overlook. And that is the amount of facilities and feed and other expenses you need for the birds when they're growing out. You know, it's really easy to buy say a GQF cabinet incubator and get 6 dozen hatching eggs from a breeder. You hatch those chicks out. You need a small room to take care of them in, a small space. But where the rubber really hits the road with these birds is when we have to grow these chicks that we hatched out. Because that is when you need to have a lot of facilities and the resources to provide these birds with what they need. And that is basically facilities and feed. And most importantly, I think the thing that many people forget about is space. If you grow birds in cramped conditions, you are not going to reach the genetic potential that these birds have. And that's what being a breeder is all about. It is in having birds that have the maximum breeding and genetics, but then you need to allow those genetics to express themselves well, and that requires feed and facilities. If you don't have feed and facilities, you can have the best genetics in the world, and you're never going to realize the maximum potential that your birds have, their genetic potential, because the birds are growing up cramped, they're stressed, they're picking on each other, they're crowded, and they just aren't going to reach their genetic potential. So you need to have a lot of space for growing out birds to run around. You can see I do have quite a few birds in this pen, but this pen is 50-foot square. And so I have 2,500 square feet available to these birds. And then I have a shelter there that's 10 foot by 12 foot. That allows me to have plenty of space for the birds to sleep in, but during the day they're out on this pasture running around. If you don't have space and you don't have feed, as I mentioned, you aren't going to have good birds, no matter how good the breeding goes into things. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and probably get some comments that disagree, but I think that I've seen many times where people don't have necessarily the best genetics for their birds, the best breeding going into their birds as far as the genetics are concerned, but they have really good facilities. They have the space, and they have the housing, and they have the feed, and those people are doing well at shows because they have great condition on their birds, and their birds, even though they may have genetics that aren't as good as other birds that are out there, what they've done is they've allowed their genetics to reach their maximum potential, and that's why they're doing well. So anyhow, there's some controversy for you, but I think the basics to remember are you need to really think seriously if you're going to breed. Like the number of birds that I have here, I have about 100 birds on the ground between these 4 different areas, but each group of birds has a very large amount of space, and I think that that's just something I'd like to remind people of when you're hatching out birds. I'm really fortunate in that I live on my farm, and I have a lot of space to utilize. If you have just a small place, have a small breeding program. There's nothing wrong with that. If I lived in town and had a very limited amount of space, I would rather have less birds on the ground to grow out, but be able to let them reach their maximum genetic potential than to just hatch a whole lot of birds in hopes I'm going to win the lottery, and you know, that next dozen eggs that I hatch could be the show winner for this year. How many times have we thought that as breeders? I'd rather not think that way, and I'd rather hatch just say 1 or 2 dozen chicks and a very limited, if I was in a very limited space situation, and grow them out really well with good facilities for the space I have and get it done right. I think you're more likely to see the good birds then. Because if you raise birds under cramped conditions, what you're going to select for when you look at your birds and you cull is you're going to select for birds that don't necessarily have the best genetics for the breed, but you're going to select birds that have the best genetics for growing up under stressed conditions, under cramped conditions, where it's not ideal. And that's not what we want. At least that's not what I want. And think about that the next time you're thinking about how many eggs to hatch or how many breeds to raise. For me, I just raise New Hampshires because I want to do really well with my birds, with my New Hampshires, and I want to hatch a lot of them, and I want to provide them with the space they need. And I don't want to hatch any other breeds because each breed you do requires just that much more space and facilities. So for me, I put everything that I have into my New Hampshires. And then so here we are now in my grow out pasture. I have 4 of these A-frame type shelters that we use, and we subdivide our pasture into 4 different areas, separating males from females, and then separating age groups from each other. The birds do really well in this system. It works for me. I don't know if it worked for everybody, but I'll tell you a little bit about it here. One of the most important things for people that are growing out poultry is to have a good fence. Those fences do 2 things. Number 1, they keep predators out, and I can't tell you how many times I've read on websites or on groups where people say, a coyote came and got my chickens. I find that really upsetting, not because the coyote got the chickens necessarily, but because the owner of the flock let the coyote be able to get at their chickens. If a predator's coming and getting your birds, in my opinion, it's your own damn fault. It's our responsibility as poultry keepers to keep predators and our birds separate from each other. And so how I do that here is I have a black cyclone fence. It's a perimeter fence for our entire pasture here. Runs along the outside. And I have electrified wire on the bottom and top of that fence. Electric fence is really effective at keeping predators at bay. They won't mess with it. Here in our area, we have coyotes, of course, they're everywhere. Raccoons, those are everywhere, of course. But in addition to those standard predators, we also have black bear that come down and eat fruit out of our orchards in the fall, and there's a lot of them in the area. And we also have cougars. There's quite a few of those in the area. we are able to keep all those at bay with good electric fencing. So we have a perimeter fence that has a top and bottom wire on it. That keeps climbing critters from coming up over the fence, and it also keeps predators that might be patrolling along the fence looking for a hole or looking for a way to get in. They touch that bottom wire and they get a heck of a shock. And I put a high power charger on it. You want to have a charger that is designed for long spans of fence and that has a lot of energy, which is measured in joules. And so you want to have at least 1.5 joules in your fence. A lot of the fences that are sold at the local feed stores and whatnot, they have about 0.5 joules in their fence. The fence that I have here powers the chicken fence as well as my pasture fencing for my cattle. And I believe it's a 2.5 joule unit. So don't skimp on your charger, and you're going to spend some money on it. But fencing is our first way that we keep predators out. And the other thing that it does is it keeps the birds in. What we have here, what I use is, I really like this semi-permanent netting that's available. I have the power off, otherwise I get a hell of a shock. This semi-permanent poultry netting that's available from Premier Supplies. I think it's premier1supplies.com. I like to get the semi-permanent netting. It has a thicker post on it, so it's sturdier, has a better two-prong base, and the distance between the posts is closer together. The reason I like that is I don't like my netting to sag in the center. I believe this is 42-inch high netting, which is just, believe it or not, the birds really don't fly much in between corrals, or pastures rather. The only time that happens is if you have sexually mature males next to sexually mature hens, and then you get some flyover from the males usually. And but I really don't find it a problem for growing out birds. I think it's really great. The other thing we do is you want to have good corner posts, and this is a fiberglass resin post. They're available from quite a few different companies. The one I get this system from, the white one you see here, is from PowerFlex Fencing. And the reason that I like this post is it's completely insulated. The fence doesn't lose any energy through the post. Now, wooden posts can work as long as they're completely dry, but as soon as that post, if it's wood, gets any moisture on it, it becomes conductive and you lose energy out of your fence. So don't skimp on your fencing. The other thing you want to do is you want to manage your pasture not like a weed patch, but you want to treat it like a pasture. And our job is to plant plants that chickens like to eat. And we'll look at a couple of them here that we have. I have a really good sod for my growing region planted in here. This happens to be a perennial rye grass, which for my area grows really super well. There's my house over there and my chicken house. This perennial rye grass forms, it's a mix of perennial rye and creeping red fescue, and that gives me a really good sod. You want to talk with your local extension or with somebody that's an expert, and don't go down to Home Depot thinking that you're going to get an expert in lawn care there. You might luck out, but talk to somebody that knows, especially your Master Gardeners program that your county extension may have. You want to you want to have a really good sod established, and you want to move these houses so that they don't, and move your feeders so that the birds don't destroy your sod by staying in one spot. So the plants, what I've done here is I interplanted my sod with clover, and this happens to be a micro clover. Clovers do really well being cut short, and the birds like to eat them, and they're high in nitrogen, which is good for the birds to be able to build protein. The other plant that's here, it's kind of hard to see here, pull out. This is broadleaf plantain, It's a low-growing plant, and it provides excellent forage. You can see this here is your broadleaf plantain mixed together with your clover. What I do is I just overseed in the winter, and I get a really nice stand of clover every year, and it just keeps coming back, of course. And so we want the pasture to provide some nutrition to the birds, but of course pasture doesn't provide all of your nutrition. You need to have supplemental feed available at all times. It just kills me when I see folks that say, oh, my birds do just fine on pasture 100%. These birds need high levels of protein to perform well, and they may live if just on pasture, but chickens are omnivores, they're predators, and they need to have a good amount of protein. You simply aren't going to grow enough protein on open sod in the forms of worms or insects, because the birds are going to eat all those things out in the first day or first couple of days, and then they're going to be low on protein. So you always have to be providing a really good feed to your birds at all times, even if they're on pasture. Another thing that I do is I provide feed to my birds all the time. It's available to growing birds. I really kind of is hard for me when I hear people that say, I'm growing out my chickens, how many times per day should I feed them? Well, you shouldn't ever have them go without feed. They should always have feed in front of them. So that's a little bit about my my pasture management. Let's maybe talk about one of these buildings here. So here we are looking at one of my buildings. This is a cockerel grow out pen. These birds were hatched in the middle part of February, so they're now a few months old, and I have them sheltered in these A-frame shelters, and I really like these shelters. The plans that I got for these shelters were originally designed by Harvey. Anyway, I got the plans from him, and we've done, of course, because I like to tinker with things, we've done a number of modifications on these units. I'll probably post another video, and I have a bunch of pictures of us constructing these, so I might put that together in a separate video to actually talk about the dimensions and how we put these together and whatnot. But let's talk about them in general here. So the first thing is, I like to have metal roofing. I think that metal roofing is really great. It lasts a long time, and it also provides structure to the house, which is very important. We want these things to be good and strong. So I like metal roofing, and I like it to be white because I'm kind of particular about how things look. And I like them to all be the same and to look good. These have there's a hook right here that we can take out, and there's a cable that runs along here that then we took a piece of black poly tubing, and so we can drag these units fairly easily across our pasture. And so we can drag these units along, and we move them each day. The reason we do that is we don't want the birds to destroy the grass underneath the unit with scratching around and manure. So I like to have this black plastic netting. It's heavy-duty deer fencing, actually. So it's a long-lasting product. I like this so much better than chicken wire. Chicken wire rots out, and it's a hassle to put in, and not only that, it's kind of spendy. This stuff works really great. It's not stuff that you can get at the garden center. You have to order it online, but it's 3/4 inch square deer fencing. I can't remember the brand, but when I do a video on these, building these, I'll post that. And we got a door here with a little latch that can allow the door to stay propped open there. We took a piece of metal rod and just bent it with a couple of eye bolts. I really like that because I like the door to be open, and I leave them open because I have good predator fencing. Leave these open 24 hours a day. You could shut it at night, but if I have to shut in my birds to keep predators away, I'm kind of worried about that. Now there's always owls and that sort of thing, and so that's why I have the birds, that's why I have this door actually shut. And so we actually can open up, and we have another bar here at the base that hooks into an eye bolt here, and that actually allows me to open up the door and leave it open, so if I need to get in there and work the birds, I can. So let's go ahead and go in. These birds are going to wish that they went out instead of in. All right, so a little bit about the inside here. Nothing fancy. Couple of comments on roosts. I used to be pretty dead set against roosts, but what I was finding is when I had birds out on pasture, the damn things were wanting to roost so bad that they would roost along the doors here, and that they would actually fly up and get on top of the house, and there'd be, you know, who knows how many birds lined up along the top of the roosts, and there wouldn't be any birds on the inside. And I really struggled, excuse me, I really struggled with that because I've had trouble with roosts causing some deformity of the breastbone on male hamps before growing out. And so what I did is I tried a wider, flatter roost. This is a 1x3 here that's on top of a ripped 2x4, and I'm gonna see how this works out because the birds like to perch on roosts. Now they aren't too tall off the ground, they're just a couple of inches off the ground here, as you can see, and so I'm not worried about birds hopping and jumping and beating themselves up getting to and fro the roosts. But I am watching these males growing out carefully to make sure that they aren't getting breast blisters or damaging their breastbone growing out while it's soft and malleable. So I put these roosts in, but they're put in here to where we could just take them out right away if we needed to. The other thing I mentioned was that we have a feeder in here, and this feeder is just a piece of PVC pipe, and it has feed in it, and I really like these feeders because they prevent the birds from slopping feed all over. And what we do is we adjust the height of the feeder up as the birds grow, and that's a real handy thing to prevent food waste. The other thing that we have here at this that I really like is we use a clear polycarbonate back plastic here, and light is something that you need to have plenty of in your poultry houses because they light sanitizes the ground for us to keep disease at bay. And so these houses I orient on a north-south direction, and that allows, you can just see there's a little bit of light going in there, but midday the light will be straight behind me here, and it can shine into the entire house. And that's why you want the south side of the house to be completely opened up. But I also have it on the north side of the house because it allows sunlight to come in, and that's really important to keep our diseases down. Light sanitizes everything. The other thing is that you want to have good ventilation in your house, but not have it be drafty. And so how do you achieve that? Well, you achieve that by having only one side of your house be open and the other side's all closed. What that allows is that doesn't allow air to pass through, to blow through the house, but yet it allows good air exchange here. Another little trick here, and I'm not sure if it'll show it well because of the lighting, but here you can kind of see it. The top of the house is open all the way across, so the metal doesn't close and make an airtight seal. That allows heat to rise up if need be. Now in the wintertime, I can take some clear plastic and staple it onto some parts of the house and kind of close it up a little bit tighter, and that works pretty well for me there. So anyway, that's how I grow out birds on pasture here. One of the things I wanted to cover in a little more detail about rearing out birds is the importance of feeding and watering. I already talked about the importance of having feed available, in my opinion, to birds at all times. At least with hamps, under my system, that's what I do, and it works for me. Let's talk a little bit in some detail. This is a black plastic tub. It's too bad the birds already got out here and ate. My stockman was already here today. I fill this each day with wet mash, and the birds eat it down. We take it in and scrub it out, fill it again. Just scrub it with a stiff bristled brush. Don't worry about bleach sanitizing or anything like that because it's out in the sun all day. I like to feed a wet mash and give that to the birds at least once per day. And we make our wet mash using whole milk, real milk from our dairy cows that we have here. And I like to use milk as a wet mash. I don't know about using homogenized milk or anything like that. I have a couple of fellow breeders who have had mixed results with that. But I have used powdered milk, calf replacer formula that you can buy at the feed store, freeze-dried milk before, and that did work well for me. And it's also more economical than buying milk from the store. So let's go ahead and come on in and look at how we do the watering here. So how I do watering is I maintain, this is kind of a little bit oaky, but works for me. I maintain a reservoir right here. This is a 13-gallon plastic tub. Has a vent on the top. That's always important so that it drains out easy. And then this line coming up here is a automatic float valve that's always keeps the reservoir filled. That's, I think, really important. I like watering to, hauling water. That's like 1,000 years ago. We don't need to be doing that. I like things to be automatic. So we have a pipe that comes up. It's PVC pipe that I've painted black because I don't like to look at white pipe running all over. So that fills the reservoir here on top and keeps it filled. There's a float valve in there and the water. And then it flows out the side here, comes down. Of course, we got an isolation valve if we need to. And then it flows down. There's my bottom electric wire. That's the inside wire, keeps the birds from scraping and digging holes along the fence. That's a real awful thing when that happens. So keep an inside hot wire. You can see it running down below the water here. That keeps your birds from scraping up against the fence. Otherwise, they'll dig holes under the fence to dust themselves, and you'll have birds getting out. So that's a little trick I do. And they're smart. They don't mess around with the electric wire. So we have an extension here, the PVC, and then these are the water nipples that I use. You can buy them on eBay. They might be available from other places. I really like these. Obviously, they're only good in the summertime, or excuse me, when there's not freezing weather. But these are called horizontal waterers. What I like about them is that they generally don't create a wet spot underneath them. That's what I don't like about the vertical waterers, and they're a little easier to use too. So the birds come up, tap them, and they just drink the water out of that little catch pan right underneath there. I have, for each area, I have five waterers. It's probably more than I need, but it's what we put in. I am somebody who believes in overkill, so why not? We got 5 waters, and the same reservoir there fills the entire length of tubing and keeps it goes all the way down there. You got to be careful about putting these things on pressure, so that's how we do it. So let's talk a bit about feed. So of course we see the birds out here on pasture, and they're all eager. They're scratching around doing their thing. But don't be fooled. Don't think that your birds can get anywhere near the amount of nutrition that they need, even on a pasture that is as green and lush as this one, because they just simply don't get enough nutrients. In fact, you can see them coming up for a treat here. That's another way that I always make sure I tame my birds down by every time they see me, they get some feed. because that teaches them to come to me. I hate chasing birds around. So anyhow, tames them down, and that's what helps. But green pasture can't even give you near the amount of feed, so I have feed available to the birds at all time. And let's go in here and take a peek. Again, we have our feeder here. They don't normally jump up on it, but I'm coming in here and they're all spooked. But this is my PVC feeder. It's two light end caps with 6-inch PVC, which we just cut out with a jigsaw. You can do it any number of ways. But the thing I like about this, I'll try to get some of the shape here. Of course, you know how it is with the video. There's always a little bit of garbage whenever you want to show a video of anything. So we put our feed pellets in here. I have my feed custom made for my birds at a local mill. But you can kind of see here that the PVC sweeps back, and that the birds make a mess by getting in. If they can pull the feed straight out, they will. But this feeder, there's a sweep here, and so the birds actually, you'd think, oh man, they're going to waste feed. That's such a big opening. Well, they don't. It's all about the shape of the feeder. And I've bought any number of hundreds of dollars worth of different feeders and tried different things and looked on the web and gotten all kinds of harebrained ideas. And an old trough feeder like this one, there's a reason that a trough type has been around for a long time. It's because they work. And if you look down on the ground here, you don't see any feed waste laying underneath this feeder. That's because those birds aren't kicking it out. And how many different types of feeders have you tried on your own place, and you look underneath them and there's just nothing but feed, and that's just wasted money and wasted energy. So we have these feeders here, and as I mentioned, we just put a single screw to hold it down, and then we'll start moving it up in height, because you don't want the birds to be able to really get in there and scrape it out good. You want them to kind of have to reach over and peck at it. And we've had really good luck with these feeders. They're really easy to make. You can make them yourself, so you can make a lot of them. You can make them in any length you want. And they're fast and cheap. Let's talk a little bit about these smaller size pens. Just going to talk about them quickly. They're actually empty right now because I don't have, all my birds are either in bachelor pens for my breeder males, or they're with growing out on the pasture, or my breeder hens, they have access way up there to 5 acres of dairy pasture, dairy cow pasture. So these are the units I use for growing out birds. They're a 3 by 8 foot, and the reason I do that is that is the most economical way to buy one piece of sheet metal to go over the roof and to still have some overhang. And it's also the most economical way to purchase this livestock panel. This is 4 by 4 inch livestock panel. I really like this because there are times when I will put these outside of my perimeter fence, and so I need the pen itself to protect from predators. So this livestock panel keeps most predators out that are the size I need to worry about, but it doesn't keep chicks in. So again, we have that black plastic here, and then I do have chicken wire on the bottom of these to try to protect from, say, possums and that sort of thing that might try to get into these here. There's a number of doors on these units. The tops open up here like so, and that allows for really easy access to the inside. There's 2 compartments on the inside of these. First one here is, I guess you might say, kind of the run, and then further in here, this is sort of the coop, if you will. It's divided by a plywood wall with a hole cut in it. And this is the area where the birds sleep. I don't provide them roosts in these units because I was trying to get them to sleep on the ground. But the younger birds, they do fine. They like to kind of huddle together anyway to keep warm. And I'm brooding in February and March, and the temperatures here are pretty low. You know, it can get down into the teens here. So I need to make sure that the birds have quite a bit of feathers when I take them out of the brooding room, which was in a previous video. and they like to kind of huddle together. The other thing I have is this is a Porcelain Reptile heater here. I really like these units. They add a little bit of, they add radiant heat to the unit, and I've read all sorts of pages of debate about whether you should provide heat to your birds or not. I do, and it works for me, and I think everybody who talks about adding heat as a mistake is dead wrong. I think you need to add heat, but you need to be careful about the type of heat you add. Forced air heat out of a heater that blows hot air around in your place is very different than radiant heat. And so before you start preaching about heat and humidity and all that kind of stuff, I think you need to understand your physics. Radiant heat is heat that is collected by the objects that are around it. It's absorbed in a different way than forced air heat, and I'll just leave it at that because I don't want to start a debate. The other thing about these units is you can see here that we still have the plastic polycarbonate. That's really important. And we have this on the windward side of the unit. The units are all tied together by extension cords, so they go from one to the other. They're tied together here. There's some of my breeding project I'm on, black midget turkeys. Of course, they come over to take a peek at what's going on. They look at everything. So I raise midget white turkeys, and I'm working on getting a midget black turkey, and kind of fun. Anyhow, so inside here I have a 4-prong outlet. I put a light timer in here that's has a light connected to it that runs. I'll see if we have one here in another unit. And so I provide my birds with light and with heat. I think that's important. So again, we use the PVC feed trough, and right here, this is a piece of PVC that down at the bottom there would be one of those red nipples that we were looking at earlier for water. And so when I want to water these birds, I just lift the lid up and I put the water in here at the hose, shut the lid, and it's done. And when I want to clean it out, that just unscrews at the bottom and it can flush out. But they really don't need to be cleaned that often. They stay pretty clean. So I've got quite a number of these units here. I have 21 of these units that I use for breeder pens and for grow out pens for birds until they are old enough to go out onto the pasture. And I'll show you how I determine when they're old enough to go out on pasture. And it's not too scientific, but it's very practical. I put my birds out on the grass when they are, you can see that this netting starts out with large squares and it gets progressively smaller. When the birds are big enough that they can't easily pass through the netting, even when it's electrified, if they're small enough, they can hop through there before it nips them. That's when we kick them out here on pasture. And so that's a little bit about how I do the brooding, deal with the younger birds before they go out on pasture. Can build up a lot of them here, and I really like that. I also feed the younger birds wet mash, and you can see here, this is a little bit dirty here with old pellets. We can fill the wet mash, and then I just have a piece of plywood that's cut into a square there, and we can set that. We can set those tubs down in each unit and have wet mash. Wet mash is really critical, in my opinion, to birds, especially if they aren't out on pasture. I think that they need to have wet mash. They just digest and do better on mash, and if it's wet. So I just take our pellets and wet them down, and that's what I do here. So that's the younger bird. I want to talk a bit about how I run adult birds that are mature. So again, we have our individual 4 individual corrals or pasture areas out there where I raise my birds. I separate them again by sex and age out there. I like to do not a huge number of matings, a huge number of hatches. So I try to hatch with each group that I have 2 hatches. And if there's a hatch that doesn't do well, I still only hatch 2 hatches, because I only want to have two age groups of birds that I raise out. Last year, I raised out 8 different age groups of birds, and it was a nightmare. To manage birds that are months and months apart is really, really difficult. It makes culling pert near impossible, and it's just not something I want to do. It's very difficult to cull birds that are 4 months older than the rest and compare them. You just simply can't do it. And so what I do is I cull within each age group. I cull all those birds together, and so I only have 2 age groups. So I have a group of birds that was hatched during the month of February, and I have a group of birds that was hatched at the late part of March and the early part of April, and those 2 groups, and that's it. And then I toe punch, as I mentioned in my other video, to keep track of the individual groups. So here's one of my midget white turkeys along with my midget black turkey project here. Let's talk a little bit about utilization of pasture and about how we deal with these older birds. So here's a couple of older birds out here, older New Hamp hens. I keep all of my breeder birds, my breeder hens, if they were good enough to go in the breeding pen for a season. And again, I usually only breed from any given year up to 4 hens and usually 2. So I don't have a whole massive flock of breeder hens flying that I have to watch out for. But what I do is I keep all of those down in that lower chicken house there. They all live together along with my turkeys that are growing out that you can see here. And they have access to the top pasture and also to the parts of this pasture here that aren't being utilized by the grow out birds. And I just keep them together. And I don't have any trouble at all with keeping my chickens and my turkeys together. Here's a different model of feeder that I just usually have just wheat in. And so that cap comes off and we can fill that whole big 6-inch pipe with wheat. The birds dip their heads in there and they eat wheat. And then there's a barrel feeder down in there that's a custom jobby of mine that I feed pelleted feed out of. But I don't have any trouble with keeping turkeys and chickens together. They do fine here with me, but I practice, some would call it militantly strict biosecurity, and so I don't have blackhead or try to keep all those sorts of diseases that affect turkeys negatively off my place by carefully managing biosecurity, which means no tours out here. Means poultry friends that come and visit have to roll their eyes and dip their feet in sanitizing solution and scrub their shoes. And if you wear rubber loafers out here, you get to wear a pair of extra muck boots that I keep out here. And that's something I'd suggest for all poultry keepers that are serious, is keep a bunch of pairs of some cheap rubber boots around so that you can have people who forget to bring them out and are wearing tennis shoes that can't be sanitized, have those available for them.